What's up, St. Philip family? Are you ready for this journey? We've already been started. We're in, first Sunday of Lent right now, and we are going to be journaling as we journey every week during Lent. And the hope is that as we go through the journal together, that you can get together with your family and whoever is your family, or even friends together, and we can go through this together. So we're journeying through Lent together, and the focal point is going to be the Exodus event. And every week, we're going to talk about a different part of this really, really important moment in salvation history. The most important moment in the history of the Israelites. So for Jesus, he knows that this is the most important story in all of Israel. This is the most important moment in the history of Israel. And he has come to fulfill that moment. So that the hope is, going through the Exodus, we can see the wonders of God, and we can see more clearly what Jesus came to do in Holy Week and what it means that he is our Savior and how he's come to fulfill the promise of salvation for all of us so that we receive an Easter Sunday. So our story begins, first of all, let's do a little tutorial here, going through the book. So just like last time, we have your cover. You can go and download the videos as you're watching this video. We have a QR code for the videos. On the back, we have our adoration, confession, and Stations of the Cross times. We have our Lenten mission. Don't miss that. That's in a couple weeks. And then we have our Holy Week schedule here and Easter Sunday. So you have everything at a glance that's there. Inside, we have our passport. So every Sunday, we come and we receive a sticker because we're making this journey through the Exodus. We're exiting Egypt and going to the Promised Land, and we're going to see Jesus on Easter Sunday. So every week on our passport, we get a sticker going along. And if you get all your stickers, there's a little prize at the end, which we're excited about as well. And then every week, we had Ash Wednesday, every week, you have a little journal page. So here, and with a question and an action. So question and action. And so the question is meant to help you journal, to help you reflect on the theme of the week or the topic of the part of the story of Israel or the spiritual lesson that we're trying to understand and embrace. And also the action is something to challenge you and your family members to do that week so that we're engaging the process and we're staying reflective and we're moving through the journey of Lent. Awesome. So we are at week 1, Sunday, week 1 today. And our story really begins in the beginning. So get ready to hear the story. In the beginning. So God creates everything, and he creates Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve created in his image and likeness. And he wanted to create them in a particular way to receive the gift of creation. So human beings are made in the image of God to know creation and act on it, to enjoy creation. And he had one rule, right? One rule. There's just one tree that I ask you not to eat from. Don't eat from it, or you will die. You will surely die if you eat this fruit. Well, we know what the story, right? The serpent comes in and he tempts them. Speaking to Eve in particular, they're having this conversation, and Eve gets to the point where she falls into the temptation. She sees it's good for food. She sees that it's a delight to the eye. She says it's desirable to make one wise. And so she wants that fruit so badly, like Abu wanted that gem in the Cave of Wonders, remember? Right? And she eats the fruit, and she gives some to Adam, and they eat the fruit and they fall. In that moment, the fall of man, they broke the one rule. They turned away from God, and God could have said, "Yep, I'm going to start over," and blow everything up. But he didn't. He said, "What have you done?" He said, "What have you done? Now it's going to be very difficult for you, but I'm going to send someone. I'm going to send a Savior who will crush the head of the serpent. He will crush the head of the serpent." And that is the moment right there in the first sin of Adam and Eve. God promises to send us a Savior. And so salvation history begins in that moment. All of history is salvation history because this is all the story, the one story of how God has created us, and then God is now calling us back to himself. And so we go through Genesis and we see how God interacts with the people, how he's calling us back to himself. In a particular moment with Abraham, we call him our father in faith. So Abraham didn't know God, but God spoke to him and said, "Hey, Abraham, I am your God. follow me, and I'm going to send you to a place, to a promised land where you can flourish, but you have to trust me. And I'll make you a father of nations. And Abraham and Sarah, they couldn't have children. They were very old. But we know that this is the story of Abraham. So Abraham, he ends up having 2 children along the way, but the one in particular, his one son that he has with Sarah is Isaac, his beloved son. And there's a moment where God tests Abraham, and we're going to hear about it in Lent. God tests Abraham and he says, do you love me more than your beloved son? And God invites Abraham to even sacrifice his son, but he says, wait, no. I know that you love me more. And so take your son. I will provide the sacrifice. So we have Abraham and then Isaac. And then Isaac has 2 sons, Esau and Jacob. And the story there is very interesting. Esau is the firstborn and Jacob is very cunning. And there's a really interesting kind of sneaky story where Esau is the one that's supposed to have the birthright of the family. He's the oldest and he's supposed to have the blessing of the father. But Jacob does this really sneaky trick on on Isaac, his father, and he sneaks in there and he gets the blessing and the birthright. And so then Jacob becomes the heir. And so he goes through his life. And then Jacob has 12 sons. And Jacob gets a little name change along the way. He wrestles with God, wrestles with this angel. And then after he wrestles all through the night, and then the angel beats him, he not beats him, but he dislocates his hip. And he conquers him, and Jacob becomes Israel. And he gets the name Israel. Does that sound familiar? Israel? The Israelites? Yeah, the people of Israel. So Abraham is their father in faith, but Israel becomes the name because he has 12 sons, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel. So there's a beautiful story there. But we know that one of Jacob's sons, one of Israel's sons, his name was Joseph. Joseph, and maybe you've seen Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat. So Joseph, do we know the story of Joseph? Well, let me tell you a little bit of the story of Joseph. So Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and everyone knew it. His siblings knew it, and they didn't like it. They were very jealous of Joseph. And Joseph even gets this beautiful cloak that his father makes for him. And his father really makes it obvious that Joseph is, the favorite. And then Joseph, he actually has these crazy dreams where he says, man, I have this dream that all these other stalks, I'm here, I'm the brightest star, and they're all bowing down to me. And the brothers, and they did not like that. They didn't like that Joseph even talked about himself in that way. And so they got pretty angry and they wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill their brother. But as the story went, they end up kind of putting him in this little cistern instead. And then they start talking about what they're going to do to him. And one of the other brothers was trying to save Joseph. But then there's this traveling caravan and he gets sold into slavery. Joseph is sold into slavery and he eventually ends up in Egypt. And fast forward the story. There are a few things that happen. Joseph does a really good job, and then he ends up interpreting Pharaoh's dream. So Pharaoh, Lord of Egypt, he has a dream, and he doesn't know what it means, and no one can interpret the dream. And Joseph is able to go there and interpret Pharaoh's dream. And because of that, he becomes in charge of half the kingdom, the whole kingdom, really. Basically, he becomes Pharaoh's number 2. And one of the dreams that Joseph interpreted was that there would be a great famine in the land, a great famine, and that Egypt needed to prepare for the famine, to put stock of grain and to a surplus so that they would then be able to survive the famine. And he said that other nations are going to come to Egypt because they're going to need help because of the famine in the land, famine where nothing can grow and people are dying. And so they need food. And so Joseph, he's the operations manager for the whole thing. And guess who needs food from the famine? His brothers, his family. So Joseph, they thought he was dead. They had sold him into slavery. They told Jacob, Israel, that Joseph is dead. They said he's no longer with us. And they kind of did a whole thing where they faked his death in a way. So they're all thinking that he's dead. And they don't recognize him, and they go beg him for food in Egypt. And that's a really cool story. You can read it in the Bible. But anyway, what ends up happening is over this event, Joseph, he forgives his brothers and he takes them into Egypt. And now we have the 12 tribes of Israel in Egypt. All right, this is very important. So they're in Egypt and Pharaoh loves Joseph, right? Joseph is the right-hand man. But then we go through salvation history and it says, and there arose in Egypt a Pharaoh or a king who knew Joseph not. So over generations, Israel was in Egypt and they were growing in number and they were prospering. They were doing wonderfully well in Egypt. But then all of a sudden there's a Pharaoh who arises in Egypt who doesn't know Joseph, doesn't know the story that Joseph's is number 2 in Egypt. That's how Israel got there. But he sees the Israelites and he says, oh man, they are really doing well here. And what if they turn on us? What if they join forces with our enemies? They could take us over. So what does he do? He enslaves them. He oppresses them. He puts taskmasters over them. And he does some really awful things. He wants to take their children away. He doesn't want them to have any more babies. He wants them to be oppressed. He wants them to reduce in size because he's afraid of them. And so they're slaves now, and they don't want to grow in number, and now they're stuck in Egypt. And that's where our story begins. We've made it through salvation history. We are God's chosen people. And now, because we were doing so well, and because there's a Pharaoh in Egypt who forgot about Joseph, who doesn't know the story, we're enslaved. We're caught. We're trapped. And we have brutal, brutal labor ahead of us. And so, what we reflect on this week is the snares of the devil, temptation. It's awesome. The gospel is the temptation in the desert where Jesus is tempted 3 times by Satan, right? He gets all these temptations from Satan. And what I want us to reflect on too is like, not only as we learn the story of Israel and they're now enslaved, well, what is our temptation? How does Satan tempt me? How does he tempt me into sin? What is my sin that I fall into over and over again? And we can look at that as being enslaved. That Satan tempts us not to live in freedom, but to be a slave. All of our sin is slavery. And so this week, as we get together with our families, maybe we reflect on what are some of those temptations that we struggle with, and what are some ways that we can fight against those temptations to live in freedom and ultimately to cry out to God to help us, to strengthen us as we journey through the desert of Lent. Well, God bless you, St. Philip family. I love you all, and I'm so excited we're doing this together. And the journey continues. Every week, we're going to go through another part of the story of Exodus. But this week, we focus on that enslavement. We're trapped by the devil and the temptations he offers us every time, those traps that he's there, the snares of the devil that we fall into. So let's try to see if we can avoid those traps this week, understand them, and ask for God's grace to overcome them. God bless, guys, and have a great journey this week.